When should you talk more and when should you talk less? In this episode of the Logic and Life Coaching Podcast, Dr. Jacob Kashiwagi explains that less is always more in communication. Dr. Jacob discusses scenarios of asking questions, being a student, getting hired for a job, and writing. The answer is always the same. If you can, communicate less.
Welcome to the Logic and Life Coaching Podcast, episode 60.
Everyone wants happiness and success, and we know how to get you there. Come listen to the Leadership Society of Arizona as we teach a proven logic to help you simplify life, overcome challenges, and predict the future. You're listening to the Logic and Life Coaching Podcast.
Welcome to the Logic and Life Coaching Podcast. My name is Chuck Solanas, and I'm joined by our very, very special guest, Dr. Jacob Kashiwagi.
Hi, Chuck.
Thank you for coming on, our special guest. We appreciate you. We're going to have a question that's kind of a follow-up to our last episode.
Yes.
We were talking about the information measurement theory, and one of the pieces of advice that you gave was that you should communicate less. So less communication is better. More communication is a bad thing. So I wanted to get a more of a detailed answer of why is communication a bad thing? Because I know that having a therapist or a mentor, you'll have to communicate more of your problems for them to solve them. You also have said that writing more is a good thing. And LSA's YouTube channel has a lot of me, and other people's on the team communicating. So what do you mean by more communication is a bad thing?
First off, communication is neither good nor bad. It is inefficient, yes. So I don't believe anything's bad. I mean, whatever happens is the right thing to happen. But what I mean is that communication, the more you understand, the less you have to communicate and the less you'll say. Does this make sense?
So are you saying that we all don't understand and that's why we're giving all these videos and communicating a lot?
That is why.
Okay.
If I understood 100% of information out there, yeah, you better believe I probably wouldn't be doing this.
Cuts deep.
I don't think anybody would be. Because if you understood that much, if you were that intelligent, yes, you'd probably be doing other things. Not that
like
this
what?
is a good thing to do. I don't know. I don't know everything. This is the best thing I can think of spending my time doing.
Got it. Okay.
No, but for example, I can give you a lot of different instances here. Teaching. A teacher that can say less will usually help their students learn more. And why? It's because if you understand exactly what your student can learn, the best thing you can do is only relay that information, nothing more. Because if your student only has the capacity of learning this much, anything over this much is just confusing them. It's just more information they got to take into their brain that they can't understand. So the optimal learning for this child that won't stress them out, where they can actually do something and learn something that will help them, is this much. If you're a teacher and you're teaching them like this much, then you got like this amount that's just confusing them. And it's going to waste their time. They're going to study it. They won't understand it. And this has actually been proven. We went into a school system And in their math class, Algebra 1, we took 50% of the class of all the students in school taking it. And we taught them less curriculum. And we found out they scored better on the standardized test. Even the part we didn't teach them, they scored better on that part as well. And what we're finding out is the students weren't as stressed out. Since we taught them less information, the information we did teach them, they learned well. They learned well enough that even the section we didn't teach them, they could kind of figure out how to do it on their own.
All right.
So the less you have to say, the more people can learn.
Okay, so yeah, there's a sort of thing of information overload, which can happen in a curriculum, especially when, you know, you've got all these other issues going on in your life. You think, well, how am I going to learn all this? And yeah, maybe learning less would, like focusing on the more important parts would be better. There is a study that I remember where these teachers that thought that their students were low performing, that they taught them differently than the high performing students. So when they switched them, put the lowest performing students in the teacher that had high performing students, and they put the high performing students in the low performing teachers' classes, it just completely flipped. Their performance of the high performing students went down and the low performing students went way up. So I think there may be a difference in communication there as well. You probably have more communication, or I would think at that point when you have that expectation that they're high performing. What are your thoughts?
No, usually when you have a high performing teacher, they will say less. They'll give the students more freedom. Like if you ever go into high performing programs, those programs are more rigorous, but not as much is said. Like the teachers give the students more free time. They get more time to be able to explore and whatnot. And it's the purpose of those programs. If it's not, then it might not necessarily be helping the students understand more. They just might be memorizing and regurgitating a lot, but not really being able to apply. And you find this a lot. You realize that the highest performing academic systems, meaning how a system teaches a child, are ones that try to minimize what you're teaching to the children. There's studies on a person named Sugatra Mitra. He did these studies in India where he didn't even have a teacher. He just put a computer in a hole in a wall in a very poor area of India, and he started finding out that the students taught themselves, that these children in the area would teach themselves how to use a computer, and then as they learned how to use a computer, to learn different subjects on their own. And then this person, I think, opened a school or has been testing a school where their only teacher is a mentor. And this mentor isn't meant to teach the students anything. So there's minimal communication there. The mentor is just supposed to be there in case the student needs anything and wants advice in anything or help in something. And so they're totally cutting out, in a lot of these high-performing programs, the teaching aspect, because they found out that the teaching doesn't work. In fact, in many cases, the students learning on their own, going out and looking on their own, going out and learning it on their own is much more efficient with having a very wise mentor there to point them in the right directions in those few times they need it. So you've seen this in many school systems in educations that do really well. Now let's do another thing. You might say, well, if you don't communicate enough, then it could cause very big issues. And you're right. But when you look at this, if you take a team or two people doing a project or doing something together, who has more understanding and expertise? The two people who have to talk a lot or the two people who don't have to talk a lot?
Well, past the initial planning stages, I would say those that don't have to talk a lot.
Yes, because the ones who have to talk a lot, they haven't done it very much. So they don't really know how to do it. So they have to figure out who is doing what and how they're doing it. But the two people who have worked together forever, who understand how to do it, who've done it a million times, and they have a lot of information about it, well, if they've done it a million times together, they no longer have to ask the other person what they're doing. They just know, right? So the people who understand more, they don't have to communicate as much. The people who understand less, you're right, they do have to communicate. But because they understand less, they have to communicate, they're less efficient. It's not a bad thing. It's just that the less you understand, the more you have to talk.
Okay, so if you're saying that it's more of a bad thing to communicate, not
No,
more, you're just saying it's less efficient.
Less efficient, yes.
Okay. All right. So when you're like at a new job and you're asking a ton of questions, that's obviously not a bad thing, right?
If you don't understand, you have to ask the questions. But hopefully, if you got hired for a job, in general, you're an expert at that job. They hired you because of your expertise. So you don't have to ask a lot of questions because you already know what you're doing. The only questions you have to ask are those few things that are different in this organization that you're going to.
So you don't believe in hiring someone to develop them?
No, definitely not. Because people inherently have things that they're really good at, that they're just inherently really good at. And I believe they don't need a lot of training for it. They might need a little bit, but not a lot. And so if you're hiring someone expecting them to improve greatly because of experience in that, yeah, you're probably not going to, your expectations are probably going to be disappointed.
That like goes in the face of a lot of different companies that hire people and do these development programs and teach them a whole lot, like leadership development.
It does. Project managers. The Project Management Institute has spent millions and billions of dollars training PMs up. And one of the head of this organization went out publicly and said, we haven't seen a return on investment on this training. We spent all this money and our PMs still are not high quality. They still don't do well. And if you know the performance of the industry, it's very low. And so you start to realize, I did my master's thesis on leadership development. I went and looked at hundreds of articles in companies who spent millions of dollars on developing leaders within their company. And there was no conclusive evidence on if any of these companies received any return on that investment.
How do you, like, yeah, there's a lot of companies that are like, well, I'll invest it anyways, you know, we invest in our people. Do you think that's like a bad idea to invest in your people?
No, I think it's a great idea to invest in your people, but I'm only going to invest in someone who's shown me an aptitude to do it already. And I won't have to invest a lot. When I say it's good to invest in people, I mean, if I find someone who's really, really good at teaching, and I'm in the teaching business, I'm going to pay them a lot of money. I don't want to pay my money to get them trained. I want to be able to pay them money because they are valued, right? It doesn't do them any good for me to spend a lot of money to send them to training. But it does do me a lot of good to pay them a lot of money so they can reap the benefits of their expertise and of working hard, right?
Okay, so you believe that the best investment in people is giving them work to do and paying them for it.
Yes, letting them do what they're good at and paying them a lot of money for it because they're worth it, because they're really good at it. I mean, wouldn't you want a company to do that for you? Would you want a company to say, hey, Chuck, we really value you, so we're going to spend $50,000 on training for you that you're not going to see any of that and you're not going to get a raise? Or would you rather see the company say, hey, Chuck, you're doing a great job. We're going to give you a $50,000 bonus this year?
Yeah, that speaks volumes.
Then if you want to go get training, hey, you go pay for it. If that's how you like to spend your money.
Wow, that is funny. So you're saying that all this communication is less efficient. So when you don't understand something, it is best to communicate, correct?
You have to. There's no other way.
Well, unless you want to just stay ignorant of whatever it is that you're ignorant of.
That is true.
Yeah. But I know in a lot of classrooms, a lot of people, a lot of students, especially me when I was growing up, I got looked at funny when I asked a lot of questions. I asked a lot of questions because I really didn't understand. And a lot of students also probably are the same way, where they don't feel good about asking questions because the teacher isn't receptive to that sort of thing, or they don't really feel a means of getting the information that they want.
Yes. So here's a couple of things. Is you have the person who doesn't know and they don't ask. That person will never grow. You're right. You have the person who doesn't know and they ask. That person will grow a little bit, which is a good thing. But that person is still less efficient than the person who knows and doesn't have to ask.
But don't you have to ask if you're in school? Like
Some
isn't
people in school know because they're taking classes they're already good at. Some people are observant enough that when the teacher says something, they understand what it means, and they don't have to ask again because they weren't paying attention. Is that you, Chuck? Are you the one asking questions because you weren't paying attention and then you forgot?
normally it's for clarification. I don't know all the applications, and that's why I ask. But yeah, on occasion, I'm sure I've asked questions because I wasn't paying attention.
No, I'm just kidding with you, Chuck. But what I mean is, if you go into a classroom you already know, you don't have to ask a question. And that person is definitely going to be more efficient than the person who doesn't know going into the class and has to ask the question.
Got it. Okay. All right. So then so your take on writing then, for example, is that writing is a good thing. So why do you think that?
Writing is a very good thing because to be able to write well, you have to understand. And so the more you write, the more understanding you get. Because when you write something down and then you look at it and you read it yourself, you start to realize where you're messing up, where you're not explaining things well. You start to realize what doesn't make sense. And so writing's really good when you don't understand, because writing will help you to develop the understanding quicker. And this is where a lot of young people fail today. They don't know the value of writing because they think they know, right? But when you don't know, you got to write. And I, as I have grown up, have realized I don't know. That's why I have to communicate. That's why I have to be on this podcast. Not that I don't enjoy it. No, but it's also why I write so much. Because the more I write, the less I have to write to get the same point across. And as I get older, I even have to write less and less because I understand more and more because of what I do, because I write so much, because I do these podcasts.
Okay. So you mean that you can condense your idea in a shorter, easier to follow way as you develop your writing ability. Is that correct?
Definitely. And in other words, I understand more.
Okay.
I don't have to say as much.
That makes sense. Okay. So with all of this writing, what do you expect as a result for the students? Like, do you they go into a class, they write down everything they hear, then they organize their notes afterwards, and then they're able to explain it?
Wait, first, my hope is that as students write notes, if you're writing notes, my hope is that you're not writing everything down. That at first you might write everything down, but as you get better at it, you know what to write down and what not to. And as you get to be an expert at it, you only write down things that you have to remember or that are important for the test. Right? So writing is a process no matter if you're writing a book, if you're writing notes, whatever. You start out, you don't know what to write, so you write everything. But hopefully as you're developing it, you're writing less and less because you know what to write. So for my books, I try to write less and less. And you can see society. So people don't want to read a 500-page book anymore on self-help. But people will read like a 50-page book, right? And they don't want to read a book with like, you know, like 5-type font and like, you got to like read like this huge long page of like really small font, right? They want to like read bigger words, you know, the font's bigger, you know, it's easier to read. They want to read something that has simple language in it, right? So as you see time go on, people are expecting people to get better at writing. People don't want to read as much. People want to get the idea without having to read 500 pages.
Okay. Just being more concise, more like a one-pager rather than something that's like a long academic textbook.
You got it. When I was teaching at university, the assignments were one-pagers, as you know.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to read a lot.
Anyway, let's just summarize the times that you should communicate a lot and times that you should communicate less.
Every time communicate less, if you can. Were you expecting me to say something differently?
Well, I was expecting you to say, well, you know, when you don't know, it's okay to communicate. It's okay to ask questions. It's all right that you're learning, but you're saying always communicate less, which may inspire some fear to ask questions when they don't know.
No, if you have to ask a question because you don't know, ask. But if you can minimize your communication, minimize it. Always. But here's the thing, is I would err to the side of saying less than the side of saying more. I would experiment with how little you can say, how little you can ask, but still be able to do well. Yes, you might make a mistake. You might find out I should have asked this question and I didn't, and now like I'm not going to get a good grade on the assignment, which is okay. Because if you never experiment with what you don't say, and what you can get away with not saying, then you never know what's really important to saying, what's important, what you don't need to say, right? So I always tell people, experiment. Don't be afraid to say nothing. Because you just might find out that what you didn't say wasn't even needed.
All right. Okay. Well, I think that's enough for this episode. Thank you so much, Dr. Jacob, for that perspective and the insight. I appreciate you listeners for listening and viewers for watching. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you for listening to the Logic and Life Coaching Podcast. It would be great if you could take a moment to write us a review. For any questions, comments, or topics that you would like to have addressed on the show, email the team at leadaz.org. To learn more about the Leadership Society of Arizona, visit us at leadaz.org.